Whether we like it or not, most OEMs have announced plans to go all EV, even the likes of Aufrecht, Melcher and Grossersbach. However, there is a small subset of engineers within AMG that have a very sinister last stand up their sleeve. Okay, so you're looking at this and thinking, yes, it looks like a sinister S Class, but why is it the last stand of internal combustion engines of AMG? Well, technically it's not the last stand. There's going to be a couple more, but the reality is this is something that paves the way for a merging of sorts of electricity and gasoline engines. So what we have here is a 4-liter twin turbocharged V8, but in the back we have an electric motor. So technically this is a plug-in hybrid, and you're thinking, that's nothing new. Porsche's been doing that for years in Cayennes and Panameras. Well, what's different here is the motor's in a different place. So in a Cayenne or a Panamera, the motor is here, somewhere in the housing of the transmission. This sits in the rear axle. Now the idea, at least from a logical perspective, is to provide more torque on launch or under load. But this system goes a couple of steps further in that this is an all-wheel drive vehicle. It's a 4MATIC S63 like they have been before. But if you put the electric motor in the rear, can the electric motor drive the front? And there we have a very unique trick. So the same drive shaft that connects the transmission to the electronic limited slip differential in the rear, that can be used to send the power from the EV motor to the front. Now there's a catch here. It uses a traditional 4MATIC system. However, you can't send, say, 100% of the EV power to the front. It's limited to up to 50-50. However, you can do 100% of the power, meaning from the gas engine, to the rear. Now about that electric motor, that's something a bit different. Now why do I say that? Because it's not one of the off-the-shelf motors from other AMG applications in electrification with Mercedes Benz, namely EQs. This one, the technology of it comes from the AMG race team. Now in terms of putting together the 4-liter twin turbocharged V8 and the electric motor in the rear, it's kind of comical, the output. 791 horsepower and 1,055 pounds of torque. That's the combined system output. So you can imagine, how the hell do you get that kind of power, really torque, to the rear wheels? Well, it's not just the transmission here. There's also a transmission back here, and this is where they do borrow a page from the Porsche Taycan in that instead of being a single speed like most EVs, it's a 2-speed electric transmission that works up to, you ready for this? 0 to 87 miles an hour for first gear, and then anything above 87 miles an hour, that's second gear. Now I could understand a question coming about why would they need 2 separate transmissions in a hybrid propulsion system? Answer, the motor in the back spins at like 13,500 RPM. This, even a crazy V8 like this, is 6 to maybe 7,000 RPM. So that's why they need to have a different transmission to manage the kind of torque and power that come out of the rear. Then while we're on the EV system, the electrical system with the overall propulsion system, meaning the combined system, is 400 volt. So it's not like the 48 volt systems we've seen in the E53. Here they have an integrated starter generator motor, but not between the gas engine and the transmission in the front, rather hanging off the belt that takes up the role of the starter and the generator. The hope here is to make this a very complex car more reliable as it gets older because it has less moving parts. That's something we'll have to discuss in probably 5 or 6 years. Then we get into the whole reason for being of this mousetrap, and that would be performance figures. And they're a Mercedes S Class. Now we've driven a couple of these now. This, 0 to 60, 3.2 seconds. VMAX, 155 miles an hour. Yes, that part's limited. Plug-in hybrids are heavy. Are they this heavy? 5,722 pounds, or depending on expressio weights and measures, 2,595 kilograms. Now, as a point of reference, a standard S580 is 1,000 pounds lighter. With that, Sport Plus. Oh yeah, oh my God. Oh, hey now, that's Wow, I can believe the torque on this. Santa Maria, Madre de Dios. This works, and it works incredibly well. The only way to describe this isn't immediacy or delivery of power. This is a missile. Oh my God, and it's at all points of the rev band. With that, let's discuss that transmission. It's a 9-speed, which really isn't a surprise for something from Stuttgart. However, this is from a Vaterbach, which means it doesn't have a torque converter. Instead, it has 2 clutches. And here, it's one of these things where it has 2 personalities. Driving it up from Santa Monica this morning, it feels like an S580 in terms of the way it shifts gears. It's smooth, it's efficient, it's not jarring at all. But then you want to switch your own gears or put it in Sport Plus mode, you notice the clutches, you feel the difference. It becomes, I want to say rough, but that's a good thing in a case like this. You get more personality in the way it delivers all that horsepower and all that torque, and it pulls itself out of pretty much anything. The only issue I found with the transmission, there are times it does deny downshifts. Overall, I have to say it's a seamless experience putting that electric motor in the rear, which for the avoidance of doubt is different than what we've seen in other plug-in hybrids from Germany. And here I can see why they do it. I feel the extra torque. There is a noticeable difference in the personality of the way this thing delivers power. It launches itself, and you need to hold on for dear life. I would argue around town, it has that dual personality like the transmission, where it's not crazy in terms of the way it delivers power. It's very docile. So I kind of sandbagged at the beginning of this episode because while I shared with you all the details of the architecture underneath the vehicle, I didn't share any details about the battery because the innovation there is almost as important as the innovation we saw with the placement of the EV, as well as the use of a 2-speed transmission. You see, what they've done here is also borrow a page from their race team in that they're taking the learning from the CARE system you see in race cars. So that means the architecture of the battery, instead of being the cells that are made up of like packets like we see in the EQS 450, these cells are small cylinders, almost like a Duracell battery. And they have significantly more. To give you an idea, an EQS 450, which was the first fully electric Mercedes that you and I drove, that has 230 cells, which makes up, what, 90 to 100 kilowatt-hour battery. This is a 13.1 kilowatt-hour battery, and it's made up of 1,200 cells. And there's a method to their madness here. The idea is to make this battery significantly more dense energy, but that brings up another question. Wouldn't it make the battery much hotter and you couldn't control the temperature? Well, they change the way it's packaged in the vehicle, which also changes how they cool the battery. So this battery can operate up to 45 degrees Celsius at optimal performance. Now let's think about the logic of placing the battery where it is. If we put it behind the rear axle, then it could act as a counterbalance to the 4-liter twin-turbocharged V8 in the front. Then there's one last obvious question. If there's a battery and an electric motor, is there an EV-only driving range? Turns out there is. It hasn't been tested in the US yet, but the European cycle, it's up to 33 kilometers. I'm thinking once the US government tests it, probably about 20 miles. Now, I would argue driving dynamics is a far more entertaining prospect in a car like this, because look at it. It's long, it's heavy. Yeah, it's low, but it's still heavy. So what do you do to make this thing go around corners like we're doing? Well, obviously, it's got an AMG air ride setup, but what they've changed, this one has more air chambers, so it's faster, it's more responsive. And then the other thing they have to do is they have to change out the structure. Now, granted, how much you're going to change the structure that was already paid for by the S580 in 2021? Well, you can add to the structure. So what they've done is they've put shearing plates, basically extra structure underneath the engine as well as on top of the engine, so a strut brace. And in the back, there are diagonal struts. And the thing you notice, it is so much stiffer than an S Class. Not that you and I have pushed S Classes to this level, but we have pushed them on this road. You feel the car, it's flat, and that's shocking considering this car is almost 6,000 pounds. Then there's the active roll stabilization, and that is a huge component here. That's something we've experienced in other AMGs. They've added the functionality where one can disconnect either side in situations where you don't want one side to impact the other. I would argue the setup originally, where we're literally keeping a very heavy car from leaning from side to side, that's the real win here. It almost defies physics here what this thing can do. But is it a 911? No, don't kid yourself. I want to be very clear what I'm trying to convey. The reality is I am very impressed by what this thing can do, far than what I expected coming into this equation. No, it is not that time again to play your favorite game, Mind the Options game, because we don't have any pricing. You see, this is one of these great opportunities where it is an international drive event, even though it's in our backyard, but we don't get any US pricing because it's so far ahead of market launch. But we can take a stab at pricing. So the S580, which is also a V8, that one I would say is the closest to this and has base price of $124,000. So you take a guess, how much do you think the Delta would be for almost 800 horsepower and 1,055 pounds of torque and everything else we've discussed? I would say at least $30,000 to $40,000, which makes this probably in the high 150s into the 160s for base price. Then there's this car here. Now, first we have to understand the differences of the basic car, then we'll get into some of the options that are fitted to this one. The first thing you notice is that grille. It is lifted from an AMG GT, which itself is the whole Carrera y Panamerica whole theme, which I probably didn't say that the right way, but you know where I'm going with this. This looks lovely, and I love the whole slats with a big star and laurel. However, there's one thing that you probably see as missing here, and that is the stand-up hood ornament. Now, the folks at AMG, actually the CEO of AMG, he said that this is the first S-Class they're doing without a stand-up hood ornament. Said it as a good thing. Now, I get it. Some people like this look. I personally, if you're buying an S-Class, yes, this one is a very fast mousetrap, but it's an S-Class. Now follow my logic here for a minute. If one is driving an S-Class, they want to look down the hood and see the stand-up hood ornament. At least the majority of S-Class drivers, even if one were to opt for an AMG. So let's say, can we have it as an option? And if it were an option, can we do away with the logo here and just keep the slats because the grille is stunning? Then we need to press on to a change that's on the inside. And here, it's a very big change, at least for the kind of folks that would own an S-Class. Remember when they first introduced the S-Class back in 2021? The one we shot had the 4-place seating package, but then we found out when we drove the car a couple of months later, you can't get the 4-place seating package in the US. You could only get it in the longer Maybach. Well, guess what's fitted as standard to the AMG, the 4-place seating package, and can I say, vielen Dank. And this works incredibly well with the car you see here. I went out of my way to get this specific car, this stunning like midnight blue metallic with the optional 21-inch wheels that are satin finish. They are not chrome, they are satin finish. And it has the cognac interior with the walnut wood that has the aluminum lines. This car, I said sinister at the beginning of the episode because look at the way it sits. When the car is parked, it sits lower, but when you get into this thing and see and smell that interior, even as an AMG, Santa Maria Madre de Dios. Then the rest of the changes, they fall under the heading of details. For example, look at the S63 badge. You know how Toyota does with all their hybrids? All the badging has the blue around the edges, then you see the chrome. This is the same deal, but they use red because it's an AMG. Then this specific car is fitted with a couple options. I would say that color is probably optional. This does have the optional carbon ceramic rotors. So if I'm taking a stab in the dark, what you're looking at is probably between 180 and 200,000 in the US. So yes, almost 800 horsepower and 1,000 pounds of torque, but it's still a plug-in hybrid, which means we have to drive on sunshine. And what I haven't told you as we've been driving like a maniac here at Moto Canyon, we've picked up some charge, actually 2 miles in the entire time we've been going up and down the hill with that electric mode. Now the first thing you notice is that torque delivery. You can definitely tell it is rear-wheel drive. You can definitely tell it is different than other plug-in hybrids. Like for example, Panameras, they do the electric motor here. Many of them have it in the center of the car because it's easier to package in the transmission housing. Mercedes, they've taken this choice to make a difference. I would argue in the personality, the delivery of electric power. And I have to say, there is a noticeable difference here. You get in this thing, and you feel an initial rush of torque, even if you aren't literally going full taps. Now I'll show you what happens when we go full taps when we get out of this turn here. This is foot to the floor. Notice the gas engine switches on like other plug-in hybrids. And the other fascinating aspect about this EV mode, it has a personality. You know, we've discussed personality in electric cars in every episode, whether it's a Hyundai, a Mercedes, or a Porsche. And the thing that's lacking in a lot of the EQs, they don't have a personality. Like, you look at a Hyundai, it drives like a luxury car, but at least it has a personality. This one, something's different here, but makes this a much more cohesive package. The other thing that's interesting about this, remember back in the day when Porsche first came out with a plug-in hybrid, and I keep on going back to Porsche hybrids, I would argue because they're the closest direct competition to this. You were able to charge that car faster as you were driving in Sport Plus mode. If you were just tooling around town, it would still charge, but not that fast. They subsequently have changed that, and they do that to increase the range. Mercedes, they're not looking really for range here. So what they do is the old trick that Porsche did, where if I'm in Sport Plus mode and I'm driving like a maniac, I could pick up like 2 miles in 10 minutes. That you can't get in other performance-oriented plug-in hybrids. Okay, enough with the fun and games. Let's go back to electric mode and understand another fascinating aspect here. So yeah, you do feel that initial rush of torque more than other performance-oriented plug-in hybrids. But if you don't put the pedal all the way to the floor, it does kind of plateau. So you get this instantaneous torque in EV mode, but then it just becomes flat. Is it bad? No, it's just different. Then there's another mode here, and that is a hold. So let's say for the sake of discussion, I want to drive in EV mode from my home to the freeway. I can do that in electric, but then there is a battery hold mode. I go further here. Actually, no, that's comfort. Let's go the other direction, and that gets me into battery hold. That's B. So this way I can keep it at a constant state of charge so I can use it when I get off the freeway, where it's more efficient to use the electric as opposed to the gas.
Step into the darkness, stare in the direction of where the sun sets. Am I looking for something or someone?
So what have we learned today? I would argue this, an incredibly complex piece of automotive engineering, is a very well-sorted and magnificent missile. That said, we do have to get to the wish list because this is not really a vehicle meant for the masses. So can we take this kind of well-sorted hybrid technology focused on performance and put it in a package, say, the size of an E-Class, or perhaps a 2-door coupe, not a convertible? Basically, more body styles, less weight. That's what I'm thinking here. And of course, what we discussed about the stand-up hood ornament. But I am one man, and this is the point of the episode that I turn around to you guys to opine in the comments below, or via our social media, MotoManTV, all word, MotoManTV, all word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, if you got value out of this episode, I would greatly appreciate you sharing them with all your friends and doing all the YouTube things. Subscribe, notifications, and the like button. Until I see you in the next episode, bish beta.